I can understand to some extent that we have models of the world and the universe and how we, think it ought to be. And to some extent, I understand that we're born into certain situations for reasons, But the thing that I can't quite bridge, this gap, from this sort of slight understanding, is the suffering that goes on in the world. Just sometimes mass suffering that goes in places like Biafra and Bangladesh.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I used to sit in India at the feet of my guru, and he'd say, feed everybody. Tell everybody to feed. And he'd say, look how we're feeding everybody. And everybody that would come to the temple would get a bag of food or a box of food. And I would be sitting there realizing that this man had incredible powers, and that not 200 miles away was Bangladesh, in which hundreds of thousands of people were starving to death that day, And he wasn't appearing to do anything about it. And I either had a choice of saying, well, he's really a man of very limited something, or very phony, or he's just busy here, or he's just putting on a show of being concerned, or another thought was he's doing it all at another level, or another thought, maybe it's not supposed to be done. That one really freaked me, see, that maybe it was right the way it was happening in Bangladesh, see, and that one I couldn't handle personally because it was too ugly in my own eyes, and that's really what the reading from the third Chinese patriarch is about. When you're attached to this versus that, or right versus wrong, or living versus dying, you can't understand why he's sitting there feeding us and not feeding the people in Bangladesh. It's only when you yourself are not attached to death, to the avoidance of death, that you can even hear how the laws of the universe could work, because Maharaji keeps saying, don't you understand it's all perfect? And that's a hard one for me. And I say, Biafra is perfect, Bangladesh is perfect. But I've got to realize that the perfection is not only in the Bangladesh or Biafra, but it's in the reactions it has on everybody else in the world, and on the total warp and woof of things, my own confusion and revulsion and attraction and awe at the awful nature of the divine law that would allow that to exist, that it'd be perfect, right? Now, I live much more deeply now in theories, in the intuitive feeling about reincarnation, not necessarily historical reincarnation, but the idea that an entity goes on and on and on, and that a human birth, this particular human birth, is but a flick. And because of that, that changes the meaning of a death for a person. Now, I can imagine a million people, a million beings needing to take a birth in which they live a very short time, and they live in a holy area, and they do a certain kind of simple work, right? And they all say, well, let's take birth as in Bangladesh, which is then East Pakistan, because there'll be a war there, and we'll all get wiped out and get done with that one quick, right? I mean, see, that's a far out one, see, because it's scary to do those flip-arounds and to consider a meta-system in which the whole thing looks reversed, in which somebody who got off, like a baby dies at 2, and you say, are you lucky? Not, oh, the poor little tyke, it didn't have a chance to live. That depends on what vantage point you're looking at it from. That's why the Bible has the Old Testament has such a terrible time with interpreting who God is. And the whole story of Job. I mean, like, how can you do this? If you're such a just God, what are you being such an angry God for, right? And that's all of what the Shiva force is about in India, and the forces of decay and destruction. First of all, this physical plane seems to involve suffering. That's Buddha's first noble truth, right on. It seems to involve, everything has an element of suffering. Everything that's in time has an element of suffering because of change or decay involved in it. And then Christ's statement, don't lay up your treasures where moth and rust doth corrupt and where thieves steal in, which means don't get stuck in the physical plane in time where it's all, where, as Buddha said, it's all suffering. I mean, that's if Christ and Buddha were talking together, right? Then the next thing is that as you become more conscious, you realize the Bodhisattva vow. You recognize that we are all totally interrelated and that you're working to end all suffering, because that's the way of enlightenment. And you begin to see it. The way I see it is that a conscious being understands that man's role in the entire dance is to relieve human suffering. That becomes your function. Once you understand the conscious function of a human being, a fully human being. And he relieves human suffering, not because it's good to do it, but because that's what he does. Just like a garbage truck, you pick up garbage with it. Not because the garbage truck thinks it's good to pick up garbage, it's just what it does. And so you don't fulfill social responsibility out of a sense of ought or should or fear. You do it because that's what you do. Does that deal with your question?
That's beautiful.
Okay.
Hello?
Hello.
You said tonight that your guru said that, one, it was important to serve, to love people, and the last one was?
To remember God.
To remember God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know it's a question that's hard to answer just like that, but how does one get to that point? Could you talk about it a little?
Well, the first way you get to it is by asking the question you just asked. That, in fact, what you're really handed are three statements which you grow into in time. So you take them at whatever level they mean something to you, at whatever level they mean something to you, and you work with them. And then as you work with them, a new level dawns, and a new level dawns. It's just a way of starting to think about your daily life. So that when you meet people, you see, it's like I'm sitting on a Greyhound bus and reading, and a guy sits down next to me, and he's taking more of the seat, and he's overweight, and he's kind of sweaty, and I start to pull back a little bit, and then he says, you going to Santa Fe? And I'm about to give one of these short answers, yep, and then go back to my book as if sort of don't bother me, and I hear my guru saying, love everyone, serve everyone, and remember God. And the remember God does it to me. I think, well, this is God who's come to me as a teaching. I mean, am I caught in my attachment to what that makes me turn off this being? And so at that point, I put down the book and I say, yeah, I am going to Santa Fe. Where are you going? And I realized that my work at that moment is to find in every human being that which is the God in her or him. So that becomes part of my work, and then I have to deal with serve. Somebody asks me to do something, and they're asking me out of a very kind of worldly desire on their part, and I say, well, am I supposed to fulfill that? Is that what serve means? Does it mean do anything anybody wants me to do? Or is it to serve the God in each human being? And sometimes I can say no to somebody and I understand that I'm serving them. And I have to wrestle with that all the time. What is service? What's the purest service? Who are you serving? You can't serve man and God at the same moment. And so you're listening to how you can serve the God in every human being, not necessarily the worldly illusion that each person is caught in. But that's a very subtle thing, and that's why these three instructions are so beautiful, because they keep you working all the time to understand what they mean. And so you're asking the question, is the work on them? Can you hear all that?
Oh, yes, I hear it.
Yeah, I'm hearing it too, as if for the first time. It's beautiful. It's fun. I'm glad you asked that. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Love, Serve, Remember Foundation and RamDass.org. We appreciate all the support for the Foundation and for Ram Dass's work, and we hope that you will continue that support. You can go to RamDass.org and click on the Donate Now button and follow the prompts. Thank you.